3 summers of exclusion from my own family's retreat, so I created a space they couldn't touch. And for the first time, I felt free. They're no longer needed. At 32, I'd received variations of this text 3 years running. Amber Collins, successful interior designer, owner of a thriving creative studio in San Francisco. The forgotten daughter. The Lake Tahoe property had been my grandparents' pride, purchased when I was 6 to create lasting family memories. Grandpa Robert used to take me on artistic walks, setting up a small easel where I'd paint while he offered gentle encouragement. "You see the world differently, Amber," he'd say. "Don't let anyone convince you that's not a gift." When my grandparents died during college, they left the property to my parents, hoping the annual gatherings would continue nurturing family bonds. My father, Richard, a banking executive, and mother, Patricia, transformed those intimate gatherings into networking showcases for business associates and social connections. I became increasingly peripheral, the daughter who chose art school over business, remained single while siblings produced grandchildren, worked with her hands rather than pursuing respectable professions. I pulled up Instagram, unable to resist checking what I was missing. There it was, my brother Blake's post showing printed itineraries stacked on the familiar kitchen island. "Getting excited for the biggest family gathering yet." 118 confirmed guests. My breath caught. 118 people. I called Blake immediately. "Hey, Amber, what's up? I saw your post. The retreat looks amazing this year." "Oh yeah, it's going to be epic. Mom and Dad went all out. We actually had to rent 2 additional properties just to fit everyone." The words hit like a physical blow. They'd rented extra properties. The exclusion wasn't about logistics, it was about choice. They'd chosen 118 other people over their own daughter. I ended the call without correcting his assumption that I was swamped with work. Instead, I sat on my apartment floor, surrounded by evidence of my professional success, and acknowledged the truth I'd been avoiding. This was systematic exclusion, carefully crafted to maintain plausible deniability while delivering an unmistakable message. The betrayal wasn't just my parents' choice to exclude me, but my siblings' complicity, the extended family's silence, the collective decision that my presence was not only unnecessary but unwanted. As I sat in darkness, the weight of 3 years' accumulated rejection settled on my shoulders. But beneath the hurt, something else stirred, not anger, but cold, clear understanding. They'd shown me who they were. The question now was what I planned to do with that knowledge. The morning after Blake's revealing call, I woke with unusual clarity. The tears had stopped, replaced by certainty about my circumstances and options. My first instinct was confrontation, but years of experience taught me that direct challenges to Richard and Patricia Collins yielded only deflection and gaslighting. Instead, I opened my laptop and began researching. If they could rent additional properties, perhaps I could explore similar options. Not to compete, but to understand what was possible when someone chose to create rather than destroy, include rather than exclude. The idea evolved quickly. What if I hosted my own retreat during the same week? What if I invited people who actually valued my presence? I found Emerald Bay Estate, a stunning modern home just 15 minutes from my family's property. 6 bedrooms, panoramic lake views, available for the exact dates I needed. The rental cost was significant, more than I'd typically spend, more than my condo savings goal. But this wasn't about money. This was about dignity. I called my mentor Rachel, who ran an event planning business. "Amber, that sounds incredible," she said after I outlined my idea. "But are you sure? This is a significant undertaking." "I'm tired of absorbing their rejection," I replied. "I want to create something positive instead of enduring something negative." Rachel's enthusiasm grew as we discussed logistics. She offered to coordinate catering and local services, understanding the deeper motivation. "This isn't about revenge," she observed. "This is about reclaiming your narrative." I threw myself into planning with meticulous attention. My guest list included 25 people, art school friends, professional colleagues, clients who'd become friends. Each invitation was personal, explaining I was hosting a creative retreat focused on inspiration and authentic connection. Responses were overwhelmingly positive. People were excited, intrigued by the activities I described, grateful to be included in something special. Several mentioned how rare it was to receive invitations prioritizing creativity over networking. I designed a website showcasing the property and planned activities, morning yoga, collaborative art workshops, nature photography, evening creativity discussions. Every element reflected values my grandparents had instilled: authentic connection, beauty appreciation, nurturing creative spirits. As confirmations arrived, I felt something I hadn't experienced regarding family for years: genuine excitement about a summer gathering. These people wanted to be there, had rearranged schedules to participate in something I'd created. When my mother called checking on summer plans, I offered only vague responses about staying busy. The conversation felt surreal, her acting as if the exclusion was unfortunate scheduling while I planned an alternative within miles of their gathering. "I hope you're not too disappointed about missing the family retreat," she said. "I'm making other plans," I replied truthfully. "That's probably for the best." You know how chaotic it gets with so many people. The irony was staggering. Too chaotic for 119 people, but manageable for 118. 3 days before departure, my sister Heather texted, "Saw posts about your Tahoe retreat. Looks amazing. How come I didn't know about this? Just a small gathering of creative friends, nothing formal. Would there be room for one more? The family thing is starting to feel overwhelming with all the business networking." After consideration, I extended the invitation. Heather had consistently shown interest in my work, attended gallery showings, asked genuine questions. Including her felt like offering a bridge between birth family and chosen community. On departure eve, I stood in my apartment surrounded by welcome baskets I'd assembled: local artisan soaps, wine, handmade journals, personalized notes thanking each person for being part of my life. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking restoration of my worth, belief in genuine community, connection to my grandparents' values. If my family had forgotten how to create space for love and creativity, I would demonstrate what that looked like. Loading my car the next morning, my heart was full of anticipation rather than dread for the first time in 3 summers. They taught me I didn't belong at their table. Now I would show them, and myself, what it looked like to build a table where everyone truly belonged. The retreat's first 2 days unfolded like a forgotten dream. 23 guests gathered at Emerald Bay Estate, with Heather's addition completing my vision. The property exceeded expectations: floor-to-ceiling windows framing impossible blue water, spaces designed for meaningful conversation. Morning yoga gave way to collaborative painting. Guests shared stories during nature walks, worked on creative projects, lingered over meals because no one wanted conversations to end. This was community chosen rather than obligated, nurtured rather than performed. Heather pulled me aside after our second evening's bonfire. "I forgot what this felt like," she said softly. "Being around people who actually want to be here, who care about ideas and beauty and connection. The family thing has become so focused on appearances." Her words validated everything I'd sensed. Family retreats had transformed from relationship celebrations into success exhibitions, networking disguised as intimacy. On the third morning, coordinating our pottery workshop, my phone buzzed with Instagram notifications. Guests had been sharing moments: sunrise yoga, collaborative art, candid shots of genuine conversation. The posts were beautiful, capturing exactly the atmosphere I'd hoped to create. But they were also public, visible to family members who followed my friends and colleagues. Within an hour, messages flooded in. "Blake, that property looks incredible. What's this retreat thing?" Amanda. "Mom's asking why Heather is with you instead of at the family gathering." Brian. "Saw posts about your Tahoe trip. Looks like quite the event." I silenced notifications and focused on the workshop, but family awareness created unexpected tension. For 3 days, I'd existed in a chosen community bubble. Now their world was seeping back in. The calls started that evening. First my mother, voice tight with confusion and accusation. "Amber, where exactly are you this week?" "I'm at Lake Tahoe." "But we told you there wasn't space." "I know what you told me. I'm not at your retreat. I'm hosting my own." Charged silence followed. I could hear her mind working through logistics, proximity, timing. The fact that I'd had resources to create an alternative within miles of their exclusive event. "Your own retreat. This is confusing. Why wouldn't you tell us you wanted to be in the area?" Because I wasn't trying to be in the area. I was creating the kind of gathering that honors relationships instead of using them for networking. My father took the phone, using his authoritative business tone. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. If you wanted to attend..." "Dad, stop. There's no misunderstanding. You've excluded me 3 consecutive years while making space for over 100 others. I decided to stop waiting for invitations that weren't coming and create my own community. That's not fair. We explained space was limited. You rented additional properties for 118 people. Let's not pretend this was about space. Another charged silence. Background voices suggested other family members had gathered around the phone. We should talk in person, my mother said. We're coming over. No, I'm hosting an event. My guests deserve my attention. If you want conversation, we can schedule something after the retreat ends. I hung up before they could respond, hands trembling from finally speaking truth directly. Around me, the retreat continued, guests in evening art sessions, others around the fire pit, some reading quietly. None seemed aware of family drama unfolding. This was the difference. When you create community based on mutual respect, people give each other space for personal challenges without making them group problems. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Great-Aunt Alina, my grandmother's sister, now in her 80s but still sharp. She'd arrived by taxi with characteristic directness. I saw photographs of this place on social media, recognized the view, decided this looked more interesting than your parents' corporate showcase. Her presence added unexpected family validation. Alina had known my grandparents better than anyone, understood their original vision. As she engaged with guests about creative work and shared travel journalism stories, I felt profound continuity with values my grandparents had tried to instill. That evening, Alina addressed the group during our final dinner. I want you to know what you're part of here. This tradition began with my sister Alina and her husband Robert, who believed meaningful relationships were life's foundation. They created family retreats not as networking opportunities, but as celebrations of sustaining connections. She looked directly at me. Amber is honoring their true intention in ways their own son has forgotten. You're experiencing the heart of what they envisioned: creativity, authenticity, and love that makes space for each person to be fully themselves. Her words brought tears, not from sadness but recognition. This was exactly what I'd tried to create. Not a competing event, but return to original values. Not revenge against family, but restoration of what family could mean when rooted in love rather than performance. The next morning, as guests began departures, my parents arrived unannounced. I met them in the driveway, not wanting their energy in spaces where my guests were completing packing and final conversations. This place is impressive, my mother said, voice carrying unfamiliar uncertainty mixed with possible respect. My father focused on the property, recognizing quality as a businessman. How many people did you host? 23. You organized all this yourself. With professional colleagues' help, yes. Through windows, they saw guests in final conversations, exchanging contacts, making collaboration plans. The energy was warm, reluctant to end, full of satisfaction from meaningful time together. They look happy, my mother observed, as if happiness at family-type gatherings was unusual. They are happy. They're here because they want to be, because they value connections we've built. No one's networking or performing. They're just present. Alina appeared in the doorway, moving deliberately toward our conversation. My parents straightened. Alina commanded family respect due to age and her intolerance for nonsense. Richard, Patricia, she acknowledged coolly. I was wondering when you'd realize what was happening here. Alina, we didn't know you were. I chose to be here instead of your event. It was exactly the right choice. This is what your parents intended: community, creativity, genuine connection, not the networking spectacle you've created. My mother flushed. We've tried maintaining tradition while acknowledging family growth, professional obligations. You've prioritized appearances over relationships, Alina said flatly, and systematically excluded the family member who most embodies the creative spirit your parents valued. The confrontation I'd avoided was happening with an advocate I hadn't expected. Alina's presence validated observations I'd feared voicing. We never intended to exclude Amber, my father said unconvincingly. Intention doesn't matter when impact is clear. 3 years of not enough space, while expanding to over 100 people. The exclusion was deliberate, and Amber responded with exactly the grace and creativity her grandparents would have admired. As final guests departed with warm hugs and promises to stay connected, I realized something fundamental had shifted. Not just in family relationships, but in understanding my own worth and agency. I had stopped waiting for them to make space. I had created my own space, filled it with people who valued my presence, demonstrated what community could look like built on authenticity rather than obligation. When the last car disappeared, I turned to face my parents directly, no longer the excluded daughter seeking approval, but someone who had proven she could create exactly the community she wanted to be part of. The silence after the last guest departed felt different from any quiet I'd experienced before. Not the hollow silence of exclusion, but the full silence of completion. I stood alone on the deck of Emerald Bay Estate, watching the final car disappear around the bend, and for the first time in years, I felt no urge to fill the emptiness with activity or distraction. Great Aunt Alina had left that morning with a gentle hug and words that would stay with me. Your grandmother always said the strongest trees grow in the windiest places. You've grown beautifully, dear. My parents had departed the day before with awkward promises to talk soon, their discomfort palpable, but no longer my responsibility to manage. I'd nodded politely, offered no timeline for that conversation, and felt something remarkable, indifference to their approval. I spent the final day at the property alone, slowly packing supplies and cleaning spaces that had hosted so much joy. Each room held echoes of laughter, conversations that had stretched late into the night, moments of genuine connection that required no performance or pretense. I moved through these spaces slowly, not from sadness, but from reverence for what had been created here. Driving back to San Francisco, I didn't listen to music or podcasts. The silence in my car felt companionable rather than lonely, filled with reflection rather than anxiety about what came next. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't racing toward the next achievement or seeking validation for the last one. I was simply present with what was. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm in my life. I returned to my design work with renewed energy, but something fundamental had shifted in how I approached projects and client relationships. I found myself drawn to simpler spaces, authentic materials, designs that prioritized comfort and functionality over impressiveness. My work became quieter, more confident, less concerned with proving anything to anyone. My apartment, too, began to reflect this internal change. I removed pieces I'd acquired to project success and replaced them with items that brought genuine pleasure. A ceramic bowl made by Miranda during our pottery workshop, a small painting Heather had completed on our final evening, books on creativity and craftsmanship that I actually read rather than displayed. The space became truly mine in ways it had never been before, even when I'd lived there alone. Every object had a story, every corner served a purpose beyond aesthetic appeal. I discovered the profound satisfaction of living in a space that reflected my actual self rather than my aspirational one. Evenings took on a different quality. Instead of scrolling through social media or working late to avoid quiet moments, I found myself drawn to simple pleasures I'd forgotten I enjoyed. Cooking elaborate meals for one without apology. Reading fiction in a warm bath. Sketching in journals without any intention of sharing or showcasing the work. I began taking long walks through my neighborhood, noticing architectural details and seasonal changes I'd rushed past for years. These walks weren't exercise or networking opportunities. They were simply time spent with my own thoughts, comfortable with my own company in ways I'd never been before. The business inquiries that came from retreat participants felt different too. People sought me out not just for my design skills, but for my ability to create spaces where authentic connection could flourish. I found myself working on projects that aligned with my values. A community center renovation focused on accessibility, a small restaurant redesign that prioritized warmth over formality, a series of artist studios that celebrated creativity rather than commercial success. Money became less important than meaning. Not because I could afford to be careless with finances, but because I'd discovered that contentment required far less than I'd believed. My needs were simpler now, my desires more specific and genuine. I heard from retreat participants occasionally, updates about creative projects, career changes inspired by our conversations, collaborations that had emerged from connections made that week. These messages brought quiet satisfaction rather than excitement. I'd helped create something meaningful, and now it was living its own life, growing in directions I couldn't control or predict. My family reached out sporadically. Heather and I maintained regular contact, our relationship deepening as we explored shared interests I'd never known she had. My parents sent occasional texts about family news, no longer presuming to offer unsolicited advice about my career or personal life. The dynamic had shifted subtly, but permanently. They were no longer authority figures whose approval I sought, but distant relatives with whom I maintained polite contact. The Lake Tahoe property remained available for my use 1 week each summer, Eleanor's gift ensuring the tradition would continue in a form my grandparents would recognize. I began planning quietly for the following year, not as a grand gesture or statement to my family, but as a natural expression of values I wanted to nurture. 6 months after the retreat, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a small watercolor painting of the lake view from our morning yoga sessions, painted in the soft colors of dawn. A note tucked beneath read simply, "Thank you for showing me what home feels like. M." I hung the painting in my kitchen, where I would see it every morning while making coffee. It became a daily reminder that the most important communities are often the ones we create without realizing it, through small gestures of inclusion and acceptance that ripple outward in ways we may never fully understand. Winter settled over San Francisco with unusual gentleness that year. I found myself drawn to hibernation like rhythms, early bedtimes, weekend mornings spent reading in bed, evenings devoted to creative projects with no deadline or purpose beyond pleasure. For the first time since childhood, I wasn't pushing toward anything or running from anything. I was simply existing in the present moment. The loneliness I'd feared never materialized. Instead, I discovered the profound difference between solitude and isolation. Solitude was chosen, contemplative, restorative. Isolation had been imposed, anxious, depleting. I began to crave the quiet hours alone with my thoughts, the freedom to follow creative impulses without explanation or justification. My design practice evolved to reflect these new priorities. I took on fewer projects but devoted more attention to each one, building relationships with clients based on mutual respect rather than impressed obligation. The work became more personal, more meaningful, less concerned with industry recognition or peer approval. On the 1-year anniversary of that first painful text message, I found myself thinking not about my family's rejection, but about my own response to it. The woman who had sat on her apartment floor in tears, desperate to understand what she'd done wrong, felt like a stranger to me now. Not because I'd hardened or grown cynical, but because I'd finally learned to distinguish between other people's inability to see my worth and any actual lack of worth on my part. I thought about my grandparents often during those quiet months, not with sadness, but with gratitude for the values they'd instilled before I was old enough to doubt them. Their belief in creativity as a worthwhile pursuit, their understanding that family meant making space for everyone to be authentically themselves, their conviction that beauty and connection were life's true treasures. These gifts had sustained me through years of feeling like I didn't belong anywhere. Now I understood that I had always belonged, just not in the spaces I'd been trying to fit into. The retreat hadn't changed who I was. It had simply created conditions for me to remember. Spring arrived early that year, and with it, inquiries about hosting another creative gathering. I considered the possibilities quietly, without urgency or pressure. If it happened, it would emerge naturally from genuine desire rather than any need to prove or achieve anything. The first retreat had served its purpose. It had reminded me who I was and what I valued. Whatever came next would grow from that foundation of self-knowledge rather than from any remaining wounds or unmet needs. As I write this, sitting in my kitchen with Miranda's ceramic bowl holding fresh flowers from the farmer's market, the small watercolor catching morning light, my grandmother's recipe book open to a page about simple pleasures, I realize that the most profound victory isn't triumph over those who hurt us. It's the quiet discovery that their opinions no longer shape our sense of self. My family's table had been too small, but I'd learned something more valuable than earning a seat at it. I'd learned to build my own table, one where everyone could belong without pretending to be someone else. And sometimes, on the best days, that table holds just one person, me completely content with her own company, no longer needing anyone else's permission to exist fully as herself. The lake will always be there, reflecting whatever sky appears above it. The mountains will continue their ancient watch over the valley. And somewhere in that landscape, the space exists for anyone who needs to remember that exclusion from one place simply means freedom to find or create another.